Standing before the formidable Blackfoot chief, Sarah Harmon's throat tightened as he demanded payment for her 4 children's lives, saved by a warrior who now faced his tribe's wrath. Her empty hands trembled as she desperately searched for something, anything to offer that might satisfy a debt measured in her family's survival. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The wind howled across the Montana plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it knives of ice that cut through even the thickest clothing. Winter had descended upon the territory with merciless fury, transforming the once golden prairie into an endless sea of white. The sky hung low and heavy, the color of bruised flesh, promising yet more snow to add to the drifts that already engulfed fence posts and threatened to swallow small structures whole. Inside the Harmon homestead, Sarah clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air of the cabin. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers, casting only the faintest glow across the rough-hewn floor. In the corner, her 4 children huddled together beneath a pile of blankets, their small bodies pressed close for warmth. "Mama," came a small voice. 8-year-old Emma, the eldest, peered out from beneath the covers, her blue eyes wide with concern. "Is the fire dying?" Sarah forced a smile, though her chapped lips cracked painfully with the effort. "Just for a moment, sweetheart. I'm going to build it up again." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. There was no more wood. The last log had been placed on the fire hours ago, and the storm had made it impossible to venture out for more. 6 months. That's how long it had been since influenza had taken Thomas from them, leaving Sarah alone with 4 children on a homestead 20 miles from the nearest town. 6 months of learning to do everything herself, chopping wood, hunting when she could, stretching their meager supplies until they were transparent as gossamer. 6 months of lying awake at night, terror gnawing at her insides as she wondered how she would keep her children alive. But she had never imagined a storm like this. 3 days of relentless blizzard, trapping them inside as their supplies dwindled to nothing. 5-year-old James coughed weakly from beneath the blankets, the sound rattling in his chest. Sarah's heart constricted, the cold was settling in his lungs. The twins, Mary and Martha, only 3 years old, had stopped complaining of hunger hours ago, a silence that frightened Sarah more than their crying ever had. "Rest now," she whispered, tucking the blanket more securely around them. "I'll wake you when it's warmer." She crossed to the window, rubbing away the frost with the heel of her hand. Outside, the world had vanished beneath a veil of white. The barn was barely visible, a dark smudge against the swirling snow. The livestock within, 2 horses and 3 chickens, all that remained of their once modest farm, would be suffering too. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cold glass, a single tear tracking down her cheek before freezing there. "Please," she whispered, though she no longer knew who she was praying to. Thomas had been the religious one, not her. "Please help us." Miles away, Spotted Elk crouched in the shelter of a rocky outcropping, his dark eyes narrowed against the driving snow. The buffalo hide wrapped around his broad shoulders was crusted with ice, but he showed no sign of discomfort. He had been tracking a deer for 2 days, following its desperate path through the worsening storm. His people needed meat, and he had volunteered for this hunt despite the elders' warnings about the weather. Spotted Elk was not a young man. At 40 summers, the cold penetrated his bones more deeply than it once had, and the old arrow wound in his thigh ached fiercely in this weather. But he was still the strongest hunter among the Blackfoot people who had made their winter camp in the sheltered valley to the north, not Apache, as the white settlers often mistakenly called all native peoples they encountered. The thought brought a grim smile to his weathered face. The whites saw only what they expected to see. A movement in the distance caught his eye, not the deer he had been tracking, but smoke, faint and struggling against the howling wind, but unmistakable. A chimney then, a settler's cabin. Spotted Elk's first instinct was to turn away. The white people were not his concern. They had taken Blackfoot land, pushed his people into smaller and smaller territories. Chief Running Bear had negotiated treaties, only to see them broken time and again. The army fought to the east, encroached further each season, bringing with it disease, whiskey, and death, but something made him pause. The smoke was too thin, too weak. In this killing cold, a proper fire would produce a thicker plume. Whoever was in that cabin was either gone or dying. He should turn back. The deer's trail would be covered soon, and his people were waiting. Running Bear would expect him to return with meat, not stories of white settlers. Yet as he started to move away, the image of the fading smoke pulled at him. He remembered another winter, many years ago, when his own wife and infant son had frozen to death while he was away hunting. He had returned to find them blue and still, the fire long extinguished. The memory still haunted his dreams. With a muttered prayer to the spirits for guidance, Spotted Elk altered his course. The deer would have to wait. First, he would see what lay within that dying cabin. Then, he would decide what to do. The wind cut at his face as he moved through the deepening snow, his footsteps nearly silent despite the burden he carried. The storm was worsening, the world around him reduced to swirling white. But Spotted Elk had been born to this land. He could navigate it blindfolded, feeling his way by the rise and fall of the earth beneath his feet, the subtle changes in the wind's direction. As he drew closer, the cabin materialized from the whiteout, a crude structure of logs and mud chinking, smaller than he had expected, a homesteader's first dwelling, not the established farm of a family who had been on the land for years. The barn nearby leaned dangerously to one side, half buried in a snowdrift. No smoke rose from the chimney now. Spotted Elk approached cautiously, one hand on the knife at his belt. He had encountered white settlers before, and while some had been peaceful, others had greeted him with shotguns and hatred. He circled the cabin once, noting the absence of footprints. No one had left recently. He moved to the window, scraping away the frost with his gloved hand, and peered inside. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A woman sat on the floor near a cold hearth. 4 small children huddled against her. Their faces were pale, their lips tinged with blue. The woman's eyes were closed, her head resting against the wall behind her. She might have been sleeping, but Spotted Elk recognized the stillness of approaching death. Without hesitation, he moved to the door and pushed it open. The door swung open with a groan, bringing a swirl of snow and bitter cold. Sarah's eyes flew open at the sound, her body jerking to alertness. The figure silhouetted in the doorway was massive, shoulders broad beneath layers of fur, face partially hidden by a hood crusted with ice. For one delirious moment, she thought Thomas had returned to them. Then the figure stepped into the dim light, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Not Thomas. A native man stood in her cabin, dark eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made her clutch her children tighter. Stories of raids and scalping flashed through her mind, tales whispered by neighbors in town, warnings about savages that roamed the territory. But the stranger made no move toward them. Instead, he knelt before the cold hearth, examining the ashes with a gloved hand. Without a word, he turned and disappeared back into the storm, leaving the door ajar. Cold air rushed in, and Sarah found herself too weak to rise and close it. She could only pull her children closer, their small bodies trembling beneath the thin blankets. "Mama," Emma whispered, Who was that?" "I don't know," Sarah murmured, her mouth dry with fear. "No, but he's gone now. Except he wasn't." Moments later, the man returned, his arms laden with wood. He kicked the door shut behind him and moved to the hearth, arranging the logs with practiced efficiency. From a pouch at his waist, he produced flint and steel, and soon a small flame licked at the dry bark. He fed the fire carefully, adding larger pieces only when the smaller ones had caught fully. Warmth began to seep back into the room. The man shrugged off his outer layer of furs, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind. He was older than Sarah had first thought, perhaps 40, with lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth. A long scar ran from his temple to his jaw on the left side, pale against his copper skin. He turned to regard her, his expression unreadable. "Cold," he said in heavily accented English, gesturing to the children. "Would need fire?" Sarah swallowed hard, finding her voice. "Thank you." The man nodded once, then rose and left again. This time, Sarah knew he would return. She gently shook the children, who had fallen into a dangerous lethargy. "Wake up, little ones. Look at the nice fire. Feel the warmth." The twins stirred feebly, their eyelids fluttering. James coughed again, the sound wet and worrying. Emma, always the strongest, sat up straighter, her gaze fixed on the growing flames. "Did an Indian make that fire, Mama?" she asked. "Yes," Sarah answered, unsure how to explain what was happening. I think he's helping us." The door opened again, and the man entered carrying a bundle wrapped in hide. He placed it on the table and unwrapped it to reveal strips of dried meat, a small pouch of berries, and what looked like pemmican, a mixture of fat, dried meat, and berries that Sarah had heard could sustain a person through the harshest conditions. "Eat," he said, pushing the food toward her. "Children first." Sarah hesitated only a moment before reaching for the provisions. Pride had no place when her children's lives hung in the balance. She broke off small pieces of the pemmican, feeding it to the twins first, then to James, who struggled to swallow. Emma took her portion with shaking hands, her eyes never leaving the stranger. The man watched them eat, his face softening almost imperceptibly as the color began to return to the children's cheeks. When Sarah finally took a piece for herself, he nodded in approval. "I am Sarah Harmon," she said, the food giving her strength to speak. "And these are my children, Emma, James, and the twins, Mary and Martha." The man touched his chest. "Spotted elk." Sarah nodded, offering a tentative smile. "Thank you, Mr. Elk. You saved our lives." A flicker of amusement crossed his features at the misunderstanding of his name, but he did not correct her. Instead, he moved to the window, peering out at the storm. Bad snow. 3 days more. He held up 3 fingers to emphasize his point. "I bring more wood, more food." Sarah's relief was tempered by confusion. "Why are you helping us?" Spotted Elk was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, he said simply, "No one should die from cold." He gathered his furs and moved to the door. "I return tomorrow." After he left, Emma crawled into Sarah's lap, her small hand clutching at her mother's dress. Is he coming back truly?" Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, watching the flames dance in the hearth that had been cold for days. "I believe he will." And he did. The next morning, Spotted Elk appeared through the swirling snow, bringing more wood, meat, and even feed for the animals in the barn. He showed Sarah how to bank the fire properly to make it last longer, and fashioned a sling for James, so the boy could be carried close to his mother's body heat. Each day for a week, as the blizzard raged outside, Spotted Elk came to the Harmon cabin. He spoke little, but his presence was a comfort Sarah had not expected. The children, initially wary, soon watched eagerly for his arrival. Even James, whose cough was slowly improving thanks to a bitter tea Spotted Elk had brewed, would brighten when the door opened to admit their unexpected savior. But on the seventh day, as the storm finally began to ease, Spotted Elk arrived with a troubled expression. He cast frequent glances over his shoulder as he stacked wood beside the hearth. "What is it?" Sarah asked, sensing his unease. Spotted Elk straightened, meeting her eyes directly. "And my chief knows I help white family. He's not pleased. He comes tomorrow." Fear settled in Sarah's stomach like a cold stone. "Your chief coming here?" She glanced at her children, who were listening intently, their faces reflecting her own anxiety. "Why?" Spotted Elk crouched by the fire, adding another log before answering. "Running Bear leads our people through hard times. White soldiers push us from hunting grounds. Government promises food but brings little." His voice remained calm, but Sarah heard the strain beneath it. "Every resource is counted. What I give to you." He gestured at the woodpile. "The remaining meat. It belongs to tribe." "I never meant to cause trouble," Sarah said, her throat tight. "If I'd known." Spotted Elk held up a hand. "You needed help. I chose to give it." The firelight caught the edges of his scar, turning it silver against his skin. "Running Bear is fair man, but proud. He will want payment." Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched her shawl tighter. "Payment? I have nothing to give." She looked around the sparse cabin, the rough table Thomas had built, the few utensils hanging on pegs, the children's clothes patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible. "Of my husband, he died last summer, influenza. Everything we had went to medicines that didn't work." A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or sympathy, passed across Spotted Elk's face. "I understand loss," he said quietly. Then, more practically, "Have anything to trade? Guns, knives, medicine?" Sarah shook her head, desperation rising. "The only weapon we have is Thomas's old rifle, and we need that for protection." "As for medicine," she paused, a thought occurring to her. Moving to a shelf, she pulled down a wooden box carved with flowers. Inside were dozens of small cloth pouches, each neatly labeled in her careful handwriting. "My grandmother was a healer in Tennessee. She taught me about plants, which ones cure fever or stop bleeding, which help with pain." She selected a few pouches, opening them to reveal dried leaves, roots, and berries. "It's not much, but it's all I have to offer." Spotted Elk examined the contents with interest. "Your grandmother knew plant medicine, like our healers." "Yes, she learned some from her mother, and some from a Cherokee woman who lived nearby." Sarah hesitated, then added, "People came from miles around when they were sick. Some called her a witch, but most were grateful." Spotted Elk nodded slowly. "Medicine is valuable. Running Bear might accept this." He looked up at her. "But you must show how to use it. Words, not just plants." "Of course," Sarah agreed quickly, relief making her lightheaded. "I'll explain everything I know." "Good." Spotted Elk rose. "Prepare for tomorrow. Be respectful, but do not show fear. Running Bear respects strength." He moved to the door, then turned back. "I will speak for you, but final decision is his." After he left, Emma tugged at Sarah's skirt. "Mama, are the Indians going to hurt us?" Sarah knelt, gathering her daughter close. "No, sweetheart. Mr. Elk has been kind to us, hasn't he? His chief just wants to make sure we pay fairly for the help we've received. Like at Mr. Wilson's store in town." "Yes, just like that." Sarah forced a smile. "Now let's make this place presentable for our visitors tomorrow." They spent the rest of the day cleaning the cabin as best they could with their limited resources. Sarah washed the children's faces and combed their hair, mended tears in her own dress, and organized her grandmother's medicines, selecting those she thought would be most valuable. That night, she barely slept, listening to the wind howling outside and the steady breathing of her children. By morning, the storm had finally broken. Sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting blindingly off the snow-covered landscape. The world was transformed into something alien and beautiful, drifts sculpted by the wind into smooth curves that buried fences and outbuildings. Sarah was at the stove, heating water for tea, when Emma called out from her lookout position at the window, "Mama, they're coming!" Sarah's heart lurched. Through the glass, she could see a line of riders approaching, their horses plowing steadily through the deep snow. At the front rode Spotted Elk, his red headband bright against the white background. Beside him was a taller figure on a paint horse, wearing an elaborate headdress of eagle feathers that streamed out behind him in the breeze. "Children, remember what I told you," Sarah said, smoothing her hair with trembling hands. "Be polite and stay quiet unless spoken to." They lined up beside her as she opened the door, Emma standing straight and solemn, James holding back a cough, the twins clinging to Sarah's skirts. The riders halted about 20 yards from the cabin. Spotted Elk dismounted first, then assisted the chief, who Sarah noticed moved stiffly, favoring his right leg. As they approached, Sarah took in Running Bear's appearance. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 60, with a face deeply lined and weathered. His eyes, however, were sharp and alert, missing nothing as they swept over the cabin, the children, and finally, Sarah herself. Spotted Elk spoke first. "Sarah Harmon, this is Chief Running Bear of the Blackfoot people." Sarah dipped her head respectfully. "Welcome to our home. Chief Running Bear, please come in out of the cold." Running Bear studied her for a long moment before replying in surprisingly good English. "Your home sits on land where my grandfather hunted buffalo, before fences cut earth like knife wounds." Despite the harsh words, his tone remained neutral. "Spotted Elk tells me you were dying when he found you." "Yes," Sarah admitted. "Without his help, my children and I would not have survived the storm. We are deeply grateful." Running Bear nodded, then stepped past her into the cabin. His gaze took in every detail, the meager furnishings, the patched clothing, the thin pallets where the family slept. Spotted Elk followed, positioning himself near the door as if ready to intervene if necessary. Running Bear lowered himself onto the bench at the table, wincing slightly as he extended his leg. Sarah noticed the swelling around his knee, the way he rubbed it absently. "Spotted Elk says you have medicine to trade," the chief said. "Show me." Sarah brought forward her grandmother's box, setting it on the table with care. "These are remedies passed down through my family for generations," she explained, opening the lid. "Each has a specific purpose." Running Bear's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "My people have our own medicine. Why should I value yours?" The question hung in the air, a challenge that made Sarah's mouth go dry. She glanced at Spotted Elk, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Sarah selected a small pouch from the box. "This," she said, holding it up, "is for pain in the joints. The kind that worsens in cold and damp." Running Bear's hand stilled on his knee. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and James's muffled cough. Running Bear's eyes flickered from the pouch in Sarah's hand to her face, assessing. "Many claim to heal," he said finally. "Few truly can." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "My grandmother taught me to never promise what I cannot deliver." "This isn't magic, Chief Running Bear. It won't make you young again." A small smile touched her lips, "but it might let you ride without pain when the snow comes." Emma moved closer to her mother, her eyes wide as she watched the exchange. Running Bear noticed the girl's movement and turned his attention to her. "Your children," he said. "They fear me." Sarah placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "They've never met a chief before. It's not every day we have such an important visitor." Running Bear's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He looked at each child in turn, lingering on James, who struggled to suppress another cough. "The boy is sick," he observed. "He's improving," Sarah said. "Mr. Elk," she caught herself. Spotted Elk made him a tea that helped with the cough. Running Bear raised an eyebrow at his tribesman. "Did he?" "Spotted Elk knows some medicine, but his mother was not a healer." He returned his attention to Sarah. "What would you give the boy if you had your choice of plants?" It was a test, Sarah realized. She answered carefully. "Wild cherry bark to quiet the cough, boneset for the fever, perhaps a bit of honey to soothe his throat, though honey is hard to come by out here." "And this?" Running Bear tapped the pouch she still held. "What does it contain?" "Willow bark, which I'm sure your healers use as well, but also comfrey root and a plant my grandmother called devil's claw. It grows in dry places." Sarah opened the pouch, allowing him to see the dried, chopped ingredients inside. It must be brewed into a strong tea, then applied as a hot compress over the painful joint. Drinking a small amount of the tea also helps, though it's bitter. Running Bear's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "We have a similar plant, hard to harvest because of thorns." "Yes," Sarah nodded. "The hooks catch on everything. My hands would be bloody after gathering it." The chief studied her for another long moment, then gestured to her collection. "What else do you have?" For the next hour, Sarah displayed her medicines one by one, explaining each plant's properties and uses. Running Bear listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his own extensive knowledge. Sometimes he nodded in recognition, other times his interest sharpened at remedies unfamiliar to him. Spotted Elk remained by the door, watching. Sarah couldn't read his expression, but she sensed approval in the way he stood, slightly more relaxed than before. The twins eventually grew restless and retreated to their corner with a few wooden toys Thomas had carved. Emma, however, stayed at Sarah's side, absorbing every word. James had fallen asleep on his pallet, his breathing still raspy but more even than it had been. Finally, Running Bear held up a hand. "Enough. I have seen what you offer." He sat back, wincing again as his knee protested the movement. "Your knowledge has value, but why should my people trust a white woman's medicine? Your kind has brought us much sickness." The accusation stung, but Sarah recognized the truth in it. Diseases had ravaged native populations since the first European contact. She chose her words carefully. "I cannot speak for all white people, Chief Running Bear. I can only speak for myself." She gestured to her children. "When my husband died, I thought we would follow him, but we survived day by day." Her voice grew stronger. "I would never offer medicine I wouldn't use on my own children, and I would never promise healing I cannot provide." Running Bear exchanged a look with Spotted Elk, words passing between them that Sarah couldn't understand. Then the chief turned back to her. "Here is what I propose. You will prepare this joint medicine for me. If it works as you claim, you will teach our healer, Many Knives, how to make it and the other remedies you have shown me." His gaze hardened. "In return, I will consider your debt to our tribe paid. The food and firewood Spotted Elk provided will be counted as fair exchange." Relief flooded through Sarah. That's more than fair. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Running Bear warned. If your medicine fails, the debt remains. I understand. Sarah straightened her shoulders. I'll need hot water to prepare the compress. As she gathered her supplies, Running Bear spoke to Spotted Elk in their language. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the chief's tone was stern, causing Spotted Elk to lower his eyes respectfully. She guessed he was being reprimanded for acting without permission. While the water heated on the stove, Sarah ground the dried plants with a stone mortar and pestle, another inheritance from her grandmother. The familiar motions calmed her, bringing back memories of standing at her grandmother's side, learning the healing arts that the old woman had practiced for over 60 years. "Mama," Emma whispered, "will the chief take our medicine away?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah murmured back. "We're trading knowledge, not giving everything away. Like when you taught Mrs. Peterson how to make soap, and she gave us eggs," Sarah smiled. "Exactly like that." When the water boiled, Sarah added the ground herbs, letting them steep until the liquid turned dark and aromatic. The bitter, earthy smell filled the cabin. She strained the mixture through a clean cloth, then soaked another cloth in the hot liquid. "This will be hot," she warned, approaching Running Bear, "and it may sting at first." The chief nodded, rolling up his legging to expose his swollen knee. Old scars crisscrossed the joint, evidence of a warrior's life. Sarah knelt and carefully applied the compress, securing it with a strip of clean linen. Running Bear inhaled sharply, but didn't flinch. His weathered hands gripped the edge of the bench, the knuckles whitening briefly before relaxing. "Now we wait," Sarah said, rising. "It should be left in place until it cools. Then I'll prepare a fresh one." She poured a small cup of the tea and offered it to Running Bear. "This will help from within. Just a few sips. It's very strong." The chief accepted the cup, sniffing it cautiously before taking a small sip. His face remained impassive despite the bitter taste. "How long until I know if it works?" "The heat and the willow bark will ease the pain quickly," Sarah explained. "But the true healing takes time. Days, perhaps weeks, of regular treatment." Running Bear's eyes narrowed. "Then how will I judge its worth today?" Sarah hesitated, aware that everything hinged on his approval. Before she could answer, Spotted Elk stepped forward. "Would if I may speak, Chief," he said in English, clearly intending for Sarah to understand. "When I found this family, they were near death. Now they live. The woman could have offered you pretty lies about quick healing. Instead, she speaks truth, even when it doesn't serve her." He gestured to the medicine box. "I believe her knowledge is genuine. It would benefit our people to learn from her." Running Bear considered this, his dark eyes moving from Spotted Elk to Sarah and back again. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Your words carry weight, Spotted Elk, despite your disobedience." He turned to Sarah. "I will take more of this medicine with me and judge its effectiveness over time. Meanwhile, you will visit our winter camp in 3 days to begin teaching many knives." 3 days? Sarah glanced at her children. "I can't leave them alone, and it's too far to bring them with me and return in a day." Running Bear frowned, but before he could respond, Spotted Elk spoke again. "I will escort her and the children to our camp. They can stay one night while she teaches, then return the next day." The chief studied Spotted Elk's face, something unspoken passing between them. "You take much interest in this family." "I found them," Spotted Elk said simply. "Their survival is my responsibility." After a long moment, Running Bear inclined his head. "Very well, in 3 days, then." He began to rise, then stopped, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. Carefully, he put weight on his bad knee, testing it. "The pain is less," he admitted, sounding almost reluctant. Sarah smiled. "That's just the beginning." The 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Sarah packed her precious medicines, carefully wrapping each pouch in oilcloth to protect against the snow. She mended the children's warmest clothes and lined their boots with rabbit fur saved from Thomas's last hunt. Food was scarce, but she managed to bake a small batch of corn cakes, setting aside the best ones to bring as a gift to the Blackfoot camp. Emma watched these preparations with solemn interest, helping where she could while keeping the twins occupied. James's cough had improved enough that he joined in their games, though his face remained paler than Sarah liked. "Will there be other children at the Indian camp?" Emma asked as she helped Sarah fold blankets. "I expect so," Sarah replied. "Children live everywhere." "Do you think they'll want to play with us?" Sarah paused, considering how to answer. "They might be shy at first. We'll be strangers to them just as they'll be to us. But children have a way of finding common ground even without the same language." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Oh dear, like when the Müller twins first came to church, and no one could understand their German, but by the end we were all playing tag together." "Exactly like that," Sarah smiled, touched by her daughter's understanding. She brushed a hand over Emma's golden hair, so like Thomas's. "Just remember to be respectful. We're guests in their home." On the morning of the 3rd day, Sarah woke before dawn. The air in the cabin was frigid, but the sky outside promised clear weather, a small mercy for their journey. She had just finished braiding the twins' hair when a knock came at the door. Spotted Elk stood outside with 2 horses. One was his own mount, a sturdy buckskin gelding. The other was a gentle-looking mare pulling a travois, a V-shaped frame traditionally used by Plains tribes to transport goods. "For children," he explained, gesturing to the travois, which he had modified with blankets to create a sled-like conveyance. "Too far to walk in deep snow." Sarah's eyes widened in gratitude. "Thank you. I was worried about the twins keeping up." Spotted Elk nodded, then handed her a bundle wrapped in hide. "Breakfast," he said. "Eat before we go." Long journey. Inside the package, Sarah found strips of dried venison and small cakes made from berries and rendered fat. The children ate hungrily, their excitement about the adventure ahead overcoming any hesitation about the unfamiliar food. As they prepared to leave, Sarah took one last look around the cabin. It seemed smaller somehow, more fragile against the vast white wilderness. She locked the door, though there was little of value inside to protect. The gesture was more symbolic than practical, a promise to herself that they would return. The journey was difficult, despite Spotted Elk's preparations. The snow remained deep, and the horses moved slowly, picking their way through drifts that sometimes reached their chests. Sarah walked alongside them, keeping a hand on the travois where James and the twins huddled beneath blankets. Emma insisted on walking too, her small face set with determination as she followed in Spotted Elk's footsteps. They stopped briefly at midday to rest and eat more of the food Spotted Elk had brought. The children were subdued, tired from the cold and the monotonous trudge through snow. Even the usually chatty twins sat quietly, their cheeks red from the biting wind. "Not much farther," Spotted Elk assured them, pointing to a line of hills ahead. "The camp is in valley beyond," Sarah nodded gratefully. Her feet were numb and her back ached from leaning into the wind. She helped the children back onto the travois, tucking the blankets more securely around them. Emma, despite her earlier insistence on walking, allowed herself to be settled beside her siblings, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. As they crested the final hill, Sarah gasped. Below them lay the Blackfoot winter camp, nestled in a sheltered valley alongside a frozen creek. 24 lodges formed a rough circle, their conical shapes rising from the snow like small mountains. Smoke rose from the tops in straight columns, suggesting fires burning steadily inside. People moved about between the structures, and horses stood in a corral made of branches and rawhide rope. "It's beautiful," Sarah murmured. Spotted Elk glanced at her in surprise. "You find it so?" "Yes, so." She struggled to find the right word. "Alive, even in this cold." A hint of pride crossed his features as he nodded. "My people know how to survive winter. For thousands of years, we have lived on these plains." Their approach was noted before they reached the camp's edge. Several men moved to meet them, hands near weapons but not drawing them. Sarah recognized Running Bear among them, moving more freely than he had at their last meeting. The chief raised a hand in greeting. "Spotted Elk, you bring the medicine woman and her young ones." "As promised," Spotted Elk replied with a respectful nod. Running Bear's gaze swept over Sarah and the children, who were now awake and staring wide-eyed at the gathering crowd. "Your medicine has eased my pain these past days," he said to Sarah. "I can walk without the anger in my knee shouting at every step." "I'm glad to hear it," Sarah replied, relief warming her despite the cold. "With continued treatment, it should improve further." Running Bear turned, gesturing toward the camp. "Come, many knives await you. The children will be cared for while you teach." Sarah tensed. "My children stay with me." The chief frowned, but Spotted Elk stepped forward. The mother is protective, as is natural. Perhaps the children can observe quietly. They are well behaved." Running Bear considered this, then nodded curtly. "Very well, but they must not disturb Many Knives' learning." They followed him into the camp, aware of the stares from every direction. Women paused in their work. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, and old men sitting by communal fires watched with roomy but sharp eyes. Sarah heard whispers as they passed, catching words like white and settler in tones that ranged from curious to hostile. She kept her children close, one hand on James's shoulder, the twins clutching her skirts while Emma walked beside her, chin high despite her obvious nervousness. They stopped before one of the larger lodges. Its hide covering was painted with symbols Sarah didn't understand, spirals, handprints, and animal figures that seemed to tell a story she couldn't read. Running Bear called out something in the Blackfoot language, and the entrance flap opened. A woman emerged, so ancient that her copper skin had crumpled like paper around her eyes and mouth. She was tiny, barely reaching Sarah's shoulder, but her presence commanded immediate respect. Her hair, white as the snow around them, was braided with beads and small bones that clicked softly when she moved. Sharp black eyes assessed Sarah from within their nest of wrinkles. "This is Many Knives," Running Bear said. "She has been healer to our people for more winters than I have lived." Sarah had expected a man, not this wizened grandmother. She dipped her head respectfully. "I'm honored to meet you." Many Knives didn't respond immediately. Instead, she circled Sarah slowly, examining her from all angles. Then, to Sarah's surprise, she moved to the children, studying each face intently. When she came to James, she stopped. Placing a gnarled hand on his forehead, she spoke rapidly to Running Bear. "Many Knives says your son still carries sickness in his chest," the chief translated. "She wishes to treat him while you share your knowledge." Sarah hesitated, protective instincts flaring. "What kind of treatment?" Many Knives seemed to understand the question despite the language barrier. She mimed breathing in steam, then thumped her own chest. "A steam treatment," Sarah realized, "for his lungs." The old woman nodded, her eyes crinkling slightly. She reached out a hand to James, raising her eyebrows in question. Sarah looked down at her son. "Would you like the medicine lady to help your cough, James?" The boy studied many knives cautiously, then nodded. "Yes, Mama. My chest still hurts when I breathe deep." "Very well." Sarah turned to Emma. "Stay with your brother and the twins. Mind what you're told and don't wander off." "But Mama..." Emma began to protest. "It's all right, Emma," Sarah assured her. "I'll just be nearby, learning and teaching." "You can tell me all about your adventures when we're together again?" Many Knives spoke again, gesturing to a young woman who had appeared beside her. "This is Willow Woman, granddaughter of Many Knives," Running Bear explained. "She will care for your children while you work." The young woman smiled shyly at the children, then beckoned them to follow her. James went willingly, curious about the promised treatment for his cough. The twins, sensing adventure, toddled after him. Emma lingered, clearly torn between duty and desire. "Go on," Sarah encouraged. "Keep an eye on your siblings." With a last uncertain glance, Emma followed the others. Sarah watched them disappear into a nearby lodge, her heart pounding with mingled worry and hope. Many Knives touched her arm, gesturing for Sarah to enter her lodge. Inside, the air was warm and fragrant with unfamiliar herbs. A fire burned in a central pit, tended by a young man who sat cross-legged nearby. Hides covered the ground, and bundles of dried plants hung from the lodge poles overhead. It reminded Sarah powerfully of her grandmother's cabin, though the specifics differed. The old healer pointed to a place near the fire, indicating that Sarah should sit. As she did so, Many Knives began removing items from a parfleche, a rawhide container painted with geometric designs. She laid out roots, leaves, and powders, looking at Sarah expectantly. Running Bear remained standing near the entrance. "Show her your medicines," he instructed. "Begin your teaching." Sarah reached for her pack, but before she could open it, a commotion erupted outside. Raised voices, including one she recognized as Spotted Elk's, argued in the Blackfoot language. Running Bear turned, his expression darkening. He ducked out of the lodge without explanation. Many Knives didn't appear concerned. She continued arranging her medicines, unperturbed by the disruption. But Sarah rose, moving to the entrance flap and peering outside. What she saw made her blood run cold. A group of warriors had surrounded Spotted Elk, who stood with his hands raised in a placating gesture. Among them was a younger man whose face was contorted with rage. He jabbed a finger toward the lodge where Sarah's children had gone, shouting words she couldn't understand, but whose meaning was unmistakable. He didn't want her children in the camp. Sarah's instinct was to rush to her children, but a firm hand on her arm stopped her. Many Knives shook her head, her ancient eyes conveying a clear message. "Wait." Outside, Running Bear stepped between Spotted Elk and the angry young warrior. The chief's voice was low, but carried authority that seemed to vibrate through the air. The younger man continued to gesture angrily, his face twisted with emotion. Sarah caught fragments of words, enemy, settlers, killed, that made her stomach clench. Spotted Elk remained calm, his posture non-threatening yet unbowed. When he spoke, his words were measured, his gaze steady as he faced his accuser. The confrontation continued for several tense minutes, with other tribal members gathering to watch. Some nodded in agreement with the young warrior, others looked uncomfortable. Finally, Running Bear raised his hand, silencing both men. He spoke at length, his tone leaving no room for argument. The young warrior's shoulders slumped, though resentment still burned in his eyes. With a last venomous glance towards Sarah, he stalked away. Running Bear returned to the lodge, his expression grim. "That was Yellow Wolf," he explained to Sarah. "His father was killed by white soldiers 2 winters ago. His grief still speaks loudly." "I understand his anger," Sarah said quietly, "but my children are safe," Running Bear assured her. "The Yellow Wolf will not harm them. He has promised this." The chief settled himself by the fire. "But you must understand, bringing whites to our winter camp is unusual. Some see danger." "We mean no harm," Sarah insisted. "We came only because you asked for my knowledge." "I know this," Running Bear nodded, "but trust must be earned, not given freely." He gestured to Many Knives, who had been waiting patiently. "Now, show your medicines." Time passes quickly. Sarah pushed her worry aside and opened her pack, laying out her grandmother's remedies, using Spotted Elk and occasionally Running Bear as translators. She began explaining each preparation to Many Knives. The old healer was a quick study. Despite the language barrier, she grasped concepts readily, often anticipating Sarah's explanations. She would hold up one of her own medicines beside Sarah's, pointing out similarities and differences. When she didn't understand something, she didn't hesitate to interrupt, making Sarah demonstrate again. "She has healer's hands," Many Knives said through Running Bear after watching Sarah prepare a poultice. "Gentle but strong, like good mother." The compliment warmed Sarah. "My grandmother always said healing and mothering come from the same place inside us." Many Knives nodded emphatically when this was translated. She spoke at length, gesturing first to her heart, then to her head. "She says true healing begins with the heart, but must be guided by wisdom," Running Bear translated. "She believes you have both." As they worked, Sarah found herself increasingly comfortable in the smoky interior of the lodge. The familiar routine of preparing medicines soothed her nerves, and Many Knives' obvious respect for her knowledge was reassuring. They developed a rhythm, each demonstrating techniques to the other, finding common ground in their shared calling. Outside, the winter day began to wane. Sarah had lost track of time, absorbed in her work, when the lodge flap opened to admit Willow Woman and the children. To Sarah's relief, they appeared not just unharmed, but positively animated. Emma's cheeks were flushed with excitement. "Mama! They showed us how to make little animals from corn husks." And James got to help feed a baby horse. And the twins played a game with stones and little bowls. And, "Slow down," Sarah laughed, pulling her daughter close. "I want to hear everything, but give me a chance to understand." James looked notably better. His breathing seemed easier, and his eyes were brighter than they had been in days. "The steam tent worked, Mama," he reported. "The medicine lady put hot rocks in water with pine needles, and I breathed it in, and my chest doesn't hurt so much now." Sarah looked to Many Knives gratefully. "Thank you for helping my son." The old woman inclined her head in acknowledgement, then pointed to Sarah's medicines and spoke to Running Bear. "A Many Knives wishes to try your joint remedy on others in our tribe who suffer similar pain," he translated. "She has learned the preparation, but wants to see how you apply it." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "It would be my honor." By the time they had treated 3 elderly tribal members with Sarah's remedy, darkness had fallen completely. The children, worn out from their adventures, curled up together on a pile of furs in the corner of Many Knives' lodge, quickly falling asleep. "You will stay the night here," Running Bear decided. "Return to your home tomorrow when there is light for travel." "Thank you," Sarah said, her exhaustion suddenly catching up with her. The day had been long and emotionally draining. After Running Bear left, Many Knives pressed a small wooden cup into Sarah's hands. The liquid inside was dark and fragrant. When Sarah sipped it cautiously, she found it sweet and warming, spreading comfort through her tired body. "Medicine for sleep," Spotted Elk explained from where he sat near the entrance. He had been a silent presence throughout much of the day, observing the exchange of knowledge with thoughtful eyes. Many knives spoke to him, then left the lodge, presumably to tend to other patients in the camp. "She says you should rest," Spotted Elk translated. "I will watch over you and the children tonight." Sarah studied him in the flickering firelight. "Why are you doing this, helping us so much?" Spotted Elk was quiet for a long moment. "When I found you in that cabin," he finally said, "I saw my wife." "My son." His voice dropped so low Sarah had to lean forward to hear him. "They died. Winter like this one. I was hunting. Gone too long." The simple words carried a weight of grief that struck Sarah to her core. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You live. They live." He nodded toward her sleeping children. "This makes something right inside me." He touched his chest. Sarah understood then. Her family's survival helped heal something broken in this man, who had lost his own loved ones to the cruel Montana winter. Before she could respond, Many Knives returned with urgency in her movements. She spoke rapidly to Spotted Elk, who straightened in alarm. "What is it?" Sarah asked, sensing trouble. "Yellow Wolf's sister," Spotted Elk explained grimly. "She is in labor, but the baby will not come." "Many Knives asks if you have medicine for this." Sarah's heartbeat quickened. "I know some midwifery, but I'm not." "The woman is dying," Spotted Elk interrupted. "Many Knives has tried everything she knows." Sarah looked at her sleeping children, then at the desperation in the old healer's eyes. Some things transcended language, culture, and even bitter history. "Take me to her," she said, rising to her feet. Sarah followed Many Knives through the silent camp, snow crunching beneath their feet. The air had grown colder with nightfall, and their breath formed clouds that hung briefly before dissipating into the darkness. Spotted Elk walked beside them, his face grim in the moonlight. "What is her name?" Sarah asked. "Dancing Fawn," Spotted Elk replied. "Wife of Strong Hand, her first child." They approached a lodge set slightly apart from the others. Unlike Many Knives' dwelling with its painted symbols, this one was plainer, newer. The hide covering had not yet darkened with smoke and time. From within came the unmistakable sounds of a woman in the throes of difficult labor, moans that rose occasionally to guttural cries. Outside the lodge stood Yellow Wolf, pacing like his namesake. When he spotted Sarah, his body tensed, hand moving to the knife at his belt. Many Knives spoke sharply to him, her ancient voice carrying surprising authority. Though he didn't relax, Yellow Wolf stepped aside, allowing them to pass. The heat inside the lodge was stifling after the crisp night air. Dancing Fawn lay on a bed of furs, her young face contorted with pain, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Two women knelt beside her, one elderly, one middle-aged, murmuring encouragement as they bathed her face with cool cloths. A third woman tended the fire, adding herbs that filled the air with a pungent aroma. "She has been in labor since yesterday morning," Spotted Elk explained quietly. "The baby will not move down." Many Knives says the mother's strength is fading. Sarah nodded, her mind already cataloguing what she observed. Dancing Fawn's labored breathing, the way she clutched at her distended belly, the lack of progress despite what must have been hours of pushing. She moved to the young woman's side, smiling reassuringly as she knelt. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward Dancing Fawn's abdomen. Many Knives translated, and Dancing Fawn nodded weakly, too exhausted to question the presence of a white woman in her birthing lodge. Sarah placed her hands gently on the swollen belly, feeling the rock-hard contraction that gripped the uterus. She waited until it passed, then began to probe carefully, trying to determine the baby's position. What she felt confirmed her suspicion. "The baby is turned wrong," she said to Spotted Elk. "Sideways, I think. It can't come out that way." When this was translated, the older women exchanged worried glances. Many Knives spoke rapidly, her gnarled hands mimicking a turning motion. "She says they have tried to turn the baby with medicine and prayers," Spotted Elk translated. "But it will not move." Sarah bit her lip, thinking. Her grandmother had taught her about difficult births, but she had assisted in only a handful herself. Still, she remembered what to do, at least in theory. "I need to try to turn the baby with my hands," she explained. "From the outside, it will be painful for the mother, but it might save both their lives." When Spotted Elk translated this, Dancing Fawn moaned something that sounded like a plea. The young woman's eyes found Sarah's, and in them was naked desperation, the universal language of a mother who would endure anything to save her child. "I tell her I'll try," Sarah said softly. "Tell her she needs to be strong for a little longer." As Spotted Elk relayed her words, Sarah prepared herself. She removed her shawl and rolled up her sleeves, then accepted a bowl of water from one of the women to wash her hands. Many Knives came to kneel beside her, watching intently. The old healer produced a small pouch from her dress and offered it to Sarah. "Oil," Spotted Elk explained. "For your hands," Sarah nodded gratefully, coating her palms with the fragrant substance. Then, taking a deep breath, she placed her hands on Dancing Fawn's abdomen. "I need to feel exactly where the baby is," she said. "Then I'll try to guide it to turn." The next hour was a battle of wills, Sarah's determination against the stubbornness of nature. Dancing Fawn bore the manipulation stoically at first, but as time passed, her cries grew more frantic. The baby resisted turning, and Sarah began to fear that she was only making things worse. Just as she was about to admit defeat, many Knives intervened. The old woman placed her hands atop Sarah's, guiding them with gentle pressure. Together, they applied force in a slightly different direction than Sarah had been attempting. Suddenly, there was movement. Sarah felt the baby shift, rolling slightly under their combined touch. Dancing Fawn gasped, her eyes flying open. "Again!" Sarah urged, and they repeated the motion. This time, the baby turned more decisively. Dancing Fawn cried out, but it was a different sound, surprise rather than pain. "The head," Sarah said excitedly, feeling the rounded firmness now positioned properly. "The head is down." Within minutes, Dancing Fawn's body responded to the change. Her contractions became more purposeful, and the women around her began to chant encouragement. Many Knives nodded to Sarah, silently acknowledging their shared victory, then moved to position herself to receive the baby. Sarah backed away, allowing the tribal women to take over now that the immediate crisis had passed. She found herself trembling with exhaustion and relief as she watched Many Knives expertly guide Dancing Fawn through the final stage of labor. The baby's first cry filled the lodge, just as dawn's earliest light began to filter through the smoke hole above. A boy, red-faced and angry at his entry into the world, but perfectly formed and strong-lunged. Many Knives cleaned him with practiced efficiency, wrapped him in soft rabbit skins, and placed him in his mother's waiting arms. Dancing Fawn's tears of joy needed no translation. She looked up at Sarah, murmuring words that Spotted Elk quietly rendered as, "Thank you for my son's life." Outside the lodge, the first person they encountered was Yellow Wolf. He had maintained his vigil throughout the night, his proud face now haggard with worry. When he heard the baby's cry, his stoic expression cracked. He looked at Sarah with confusion, as if unable to reconcile her identity as both white settler and his sister's savior. "A boy," Spotted Elk told him, "strong and healthy." Yellow Wolf nodded stiffly. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he touched his heart and inclined his head toward her, not quite a bow, but a gesture of unmistakable respect. As they walked back through the awakening camp, Sarah swayed with fatigue. Without comment, Spotted Elk placed a steadying hand beneath her elbow. "You have medicine in your hands," he said simply, "like many knives." "I only did what I could," Sarah replied. "Many knives is the true healer. I couldn't have done it without her." Spotted Elk's lips curved in a rare smile. "This is what Running Bear hoped for. Not just you teaching us, but learning together." Sarah pondered this as they approached Many Knives' lodge, where her children still slept. The night's events had shifted something fundamental between her and the Blackfoot people. She was no longer just a debtor repaying a kindness, but a woman who had fought alongside them to bring new life into the world. That bond, formed in the intensity of Dancing Fawn's birthing lodge, felt more valuable than any formal treaty. When Sarah entered Many Knives' lodge, Emma was already awake, sitting cross-legged beside the fire. The girl looked up, relief flooding her face. "Mama, where did you go? I woke up and you weren't here." Sarah knelt, gathering her daughter close. "I'm sorry I worried you, sweetheart. A woman in the camp needed help having her baby." Emma's eyes widened. "Like when you helped Mrs. Miller back home." "Yes, just like that." Sarah brushed a strand of hair from Emma's face. "The baby is a healthy boy." "Did you save them?" Emma asked with the directness of a child who hadn't yet learned to soften difficult truths. Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I helped. But Many Knives and the mother did the real work." The twins and James were stirring now, rubbing sleep from their eyes and looking around the unfamiliar surroundings with renewed curiosity in the morning light. "Are we going home today, Mama?" James asked, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Yes, after we've had something to eat," Sarah assured him. "But first, I need to rest a little. I've been awake all night." As if summoned by her words, Willow Woman appeared at the entrance, carrying a wooden bowl filled with a steaming porridge. Behind her came two Blackfoot children about Emma's age, a boy and a girl, carrying smaller bowls. "Food," the young woman said in halting English, "for children, for you." The Blackfoot children stared openly at Sarah's family, as curious about the white settlers as Emma and James were about them. The girl whispered something to the boy, who giggled and nudged her with his elbow. "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the largest bowl. "Emma, please thank Willow Woman for feeding us." Emma bobbed a small curtsy as she'd been taught in Sunday school. "Thank you, Miss Willow Woman." The Blackfoot woman smiled at the formal gesture. She spoke to the children accompanying her, and the girl stepped forward, offering a bowl directly to Emma. "I am Little Bird," she said carefully in accented English. "This my brother Fox Running." Emma glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm Emma. These are my brother James and my sisters Mary and Martha." Little Bird pointed to the twins. "Same face. How mother know which is which?" The question made Emma laugh. "Mama says Mary always looks up first, and Martha always reaches for things. And Mary has a tiny mark here." She touched her own earlobe. Little Bird translated for her brother, who nodded sagely, as if this explained a great mystery. He said something that made his sister giggle. He says, "Good thing our mother not have two same babies. She already mix up our names." The ice broken. The children fell to eating and talking in the mixture of words and gestures that seems universal among the young. The Blackfoot children were fascinated by the twins' identical appearance. while Emma and James marveled at Fox Running's intricate beaded moccasins and Little Bird's hair decorations. Sarah ate her portion gratefully, the warm food reviving her after the night's ordeal. Spotted Elk had disappeared after escorting her back to the lodge, but Willow Woman seemed happy to watch over all the children while Sarah rested. She leaned back against a pile of furs, intending only to close her eyes for a moment. She woke to Running Bear's deep voice. The chief was standing in the entrance, speaking with many knives. When he saw that Sarah was awake, he turned to her. "You have given Dancing Fawn and Strong Hand a son," he said without preamble. "Yellow Wolf says you worked alongside many knives, as if you were born to our tribe." Sarah sat up, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. "Many knives did most of the work. I only helped turn the baby." Running Bear's eyes crinkled slightly at her modesty, yet without this turning, both mother and child might have been lost. He settled himself on a woven mat near the fire, his bad knee extended carefully. "My people are talking about the white woman with healing hands. Even those who were suspicious of your presence now speak your name with respect." "I'm glad I could help," Sarah said simply. "Any decent person would have done the same." Running Bear studied her thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but not all would have succeeded." He gestured to her medicine pouch, which lay nearby. "The knowledge you have shared with many knives is valuable." "She says you have shown her 5 new remedies that our people did not know, and she has shown me at least as many," Sarah replied. "The steam treatment for James's lungs, for example. I would never have thought of using pine needles that way." Running Bear nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "This is good. Knowledge should flow like water, not be dammed up behind walls of distrust." He shifted, wincing slightly as his knee protested. "The debt between us is paid in full, but I would ask something more of you." Sarah tensed. "What is it?" "Return again when the snow melts. Bring more of your medicine plants. Many Knives wishes to continue learning from you and to teach you our ways in return." Relief flooded through Sarah. "Not a demand, but an invitation. I would be honored," she said sincerely. "Though the journey will be easier without snow." Running Bear's face relaxed into what might almost have been a smile. "Spotted Elk will escort you home today. He has prepared the horses and packed food for your journey." The chief rose stiffly. "Before you leave, there will be a small ceremony. My people wish to give thanks for the new life in our camp." After he departed, Sarah quickly helped her children prepare for the day. Emma and James were reluctant to leave their new friends, extracting promises from Little Bird and Fox, running to play together again when they returned in spring. Outside, the camp was alive with activity. Women worked at cooking fires, men repaired tools and weapons, and children darted between lodges in games of chase. The atmosphere was markedly different from the previous day, where there had been suspicion and distance. Now there were nods of acknowledgement and even a few smiles directed at Sarah and her family. Dancing Fawn's lodge was surrounded by well-wishers bringing gifts for the new mother and baby. As Sarah passed, several women touched their hearts and bowed their heads to her. Yellow Wolf stood nearby, and though he didn't approach, he raised a hand in solemn greeting. At the center of the camp, Running Bear awaited them. Beside him stood Spotted Elk, holding the reins of his horse and the mare with the travois. Many Knives was there too, along with several tribal elders. A small fire burned before them, sending fragrant smoke spiraling into the clear blue sky. Running Bear gestured for Sarah and her children to join the circle. When they were in place, he spoke in the Blackfoot language, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Spotted Elk translated quietly for Sarah. "The chief says, 'Today we celebrate new life and new understanding. The woman, Sarah Harmon, came to our camp as a stranger but leaves as a friend. Her hands helped bring forth a son to Dancing Fawn and Strong Hand. Her knowledge has enriched our medicine. Her children have played with our children without fear. These are good things. Many Knives stepped forward, holding a small pouch suspended from a leather cord. She spoke briefly, her ancient voice surprisingly strong. She says this medicine bundle contains plants gathered by her grandmother's grandmother. Spotted Elk translated. It is for protection on your journey and to remind you of your promise to return. The old healer placed the cord around Sarah's neck. The pouch rested against her heart, warm and somehow comforting. Sarah bowed her head in thanks, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift. Running Bear continued the ceremony, calling forward tribal members who presented small tokens, a pair of tiny moccasins for each of the children, a finely woven basket for Sarah, a pouch of special tea for James's cough. Each gift was accompanied by words of gratitude or blessing, which Spotted Elk faithfully translated. When the ceremony concluded, it was time to depart. The children were settled on the travois, wrapped warmly against the winter cold. Sarah turned to Many Knives, clasping the old woman's gnarled hands in her own. "Thank you," she said, pouring all her sincerity into the simple words. "I will come back when the snow melts." Many Knives nodded, her black eyes bright with understanding. She placed one hand over Sarah's heart, then over her own, a gesture that needed no translation. As they left the camp, Sarah walked beside Spotted Elk, who led the horses through the deep snow. The morning sun cast their shadows long across the pristine white landscape, side by side. "Your people have been very generous," Sarah said, after they had traveled some distance in companionable silence. Spotted Elk nodded. "You earned their respect. This is not given easily by the Blackfoot. Even Yellow Wolf seemed less angry today. His sister lives. His nephew lives." Spotted Elk shrugged. "Hard to hold hatred against one who brings life instead of death." They trudged on, the snow crunching beneath their feet. Emma and James chatted excitedly about their adventures, while the twins dozed beneath the firs on the travois. Despite the cold, Sarah felt warmed from within by the events of the past day. As they crested a hill, Spotted Elk suddenly raised a hand, signaling for silence. His body tensed, eyes scanning the horizon with the instinctive wariness of a man who had survived by his vigilance. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, immediately alert. "Smoke," he said, pointing to a distant smudge against the blue sky. "From direction of your cabin. Too much smoke for normal fire." Sarah's heart stuttered. Could it be neighbors? Perhaps someone checked on us when we didn't come to town. Spotted Elk's expression was grim. Perhaps, or could be others. Not all white men respect women living alone. The implication sent ice through Sarah's veins. There had been rumors of deserters from the army fort, men turned outlaws who preyed on isolated homesteads. Thomas had always dismissed such stories, but now, "We must hurry," she said, her voice tight with fear. Spotted Elk nodded. "Stay behind me. If there is danger, you take children into trees." He touched the knife at his belt and the bow slung across his back. "I will deal with intruders." They quickened their pace as much as the snow would allow, Sarah's mind racing with possibilities, each more frightening than the last. The smoke grew thicker as they approached, and soon she could see that it came not from her cabin's chimney, but from somewhere behind the structure. "The barn," she gasped. "It's the barn that's burning." Spotted Elk motioned for Sarah to stay back, then led the horses into a small copse of trees where they would be hidden from view. Sarah helped the children down from the travois, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard across the snowy expanse. "Stay here," she whispered, gathering them close. "Emma, watch over your brother and sisters. Don't come out until I call for you, no matter what you hear." Emma's face was pale but resolute. "Yes, Mama." Spotted Elk had already unslung his bow, nocking an arrow with practiced ease. "I go first," he said quietly. "See who is there?" "No," Sarah caught his arm. "This is my home. We'll go together." He studied her face for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "Stay behind me." "Move only where I move." They crept forward through the trees, using the cover of branches heavy with snow. As they drew closer, Sarah could hear voices, men's voices, rough with laughter. The sound sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter cold. From their vantage point at the edge of the clearing, they could see 3 horses tethered to the porch railing of her cabin. The barn door stood open, smoke billowing from within. 2 men were visible, passing a bottle between them as they watched the building burn. A third emerged from the cabin, carrying what looked like Sarah's meager store of preserved food. "Outlaws!" Spotted Elk breathed, his voice a barely audible whisper. "Dangerous men." Sarah stared in horror as one of the men tossed something into the barn. A burning torch that sent up a fresh plume of flame and smoke. They were deliberately destroying her home, her livelihood. "My animals," she choked out. The horses, the chickens, the livestock that meant the difference between survival and starvation for her family. As if in answer, a frantic whinny rose above the crackling of flames. Her mare, Daisy, was still alive inside the burning structure. Without thinking, Sarah surged forward, only to be yanked back by Spotted Elk's iron grip. "You cannot save horse," he hissed. "They will kill you. But listen." His dark eyes bore into hers. 3 men, armed. "We must be smart." Sarah forced herself to breathe, to think past her panic. "What do we do?" Spotted Elk considered for a moment. "I can take 1, maybe 2 with bow, but third will have time to shoot." He nodded toward the cabin. "Need to separate them." Sarah's mind raced. Then she remembered something, a trick Thomas had taught her during their first winter on the homestead when wolves had threatened their livestock. "Fire," she whispered. "They're distracted by the barn burning. If we started another fire on the other side of the property." Spotted Elk's eyes gleamed with approval. "Good thinking. I will circle around, set fire to trees near south fence. When they go to look, I take them from behind." "No," Sarah said, an idea forming. "Not the trees, the haystack behind the cabin. When they go to put it out, because they'll want to keep looting the cabin, you can get closer." He nodded. "Better plan. You stay here." "I can help," Sarah insisted. "I have Thomas's rifle in the cabin. If I could get to it." "Too dangerous," Spotted Elk cut her off. "The men like these." He didn't finish, but Sarah understood. Women who fell into the hands of such outlaws often suffered fates worse than death. A shout from near the barn interrupted their whispered conference. The men had noticed something, or someone. Sarah's blood froze as she realized what had happened. James stood at the edge of the clearing, having disobeyed her order to stay hidden. Even from a distance, she could see the horror on his young face as he stared at the burning barn. "The horses!" he cried, his voice carrying clearly in the winter air. "Mama's horses!" The outlaws turned as one, their attention riveted on the small boy who now realized his terrible mistake. James backed away, but one of the men was already moving toward him with purposeful strides. "Well, look what we found!" the man called to his companions. "And seems this place ain't as abandoned as we thought." Sarah was moving before she could think, bursting from the cover of the trees. "Leave him alone," she shouted. "James, run!" The outlaw spun toward her voice, hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. In that frozen moment, Sarah was certain she was about to die. Then a whistling sound cut the air, and the man staggered backward, an arrow protruding from his shoulder. Chaos erupted. The wounded man bellowed in pain, while his companions drew their weapons, firing wildly toward the trees where Spotted Elk had launched his attack. James took advantage of the confusion to dash back toward the hiding place, but the third outlaw, a burly man with a matted beard, spotted him and gave chase. Sarah ran to intercept him, her only thought to protect her son. She had no weapon, no plan beyond throwing herself between James and danger. The outlaw saw her coming and changed direction, a cruel smile spreading across his bearded face. "No need to rush, lady," he drawled, leveling his pistol at her. "We got all day to get acquainted." Sarah froze, heart hammering. Behind the outlaw, she saw Spotted Elk emerge from cover, another arrow nocked and ready. But before he could loose it, the first outlaw, the one he'd shot in the shoulder, fired his revolver from where he'd fallen in the snow. Spotted Elk dropped to one knee, the arrow flying wide as the bullet grazed his arm. The second outlaw, seeing his chance, took aim at the Blackfoot warrior. "No!" Sarah screamed, lunging forward in desperation. The bearded man caught her easily, using her momentum to spin her around, his arm like an iron band across her throat. "Settle down," he growled in her ear. "Your Injun friend is about to meet his maker." Sarah struggled frantically, watching in horror as the second outlaw steadied his aim at Spotted Elk, who was trying to nock another arrow despite his wounded arm. A gunshot cracked through the air. Sarah flinched, expecting to see Spotted Elk fall. Instead, the outlaw taking aim at him crumpled to the ground. Confused, Sarah turned her head as much as the chokehold would allow. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood Running Bear. The Blackfoot chief held a rifle, an army model that looked incongruous in his hands, still aimed with deadly precision. Behind him were 6 warriors, including Yellow Wolf, all armed with bows or rifles taken from fallen soldiers in previous conflicts. The bearded outlaw tightened his grip on Sarah, using her as a shield as he backed toward the cabin. "Stay back," he shouted. "I'll kill her!" Running Bear advanced slowly, saying something in Blackfoot to his warriors, who spread out to surround the clearing. The wounded outlaw struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face pale with shock and fear. "This don't concern you Injuns," he said, voice shaking. "Yet this is between us and them." He jerked his head toward Sarah. Running Bear's voice was calm, but carried clearly across the snow. "The woman is under our protection, as are her children." His English was deliberate, each word carefully chosen. "You are on Blackfoot hunting grounds, without permission." The bearded outlaw barked a laugh, though Sarah could feel the tension in his body. "This ain't Injun land no more." "Government says so. Government is far away," Running Bear replied, taking another measured step forward. "We are here. Now." Yellow Wolf moved to the right, bow drawn and aimed at the outlaw holding Sarah. His face was a mask of cold determination. The bearded man's breathing quickened. "Don't come any closer. I'll shoot her, I swear to God." Sarah felt the cold press of a pistol barrel against her temple. Her thoughts flew to her children, watching from the trees, Emma trying to keep the twins quiet, James, who had only wanted to save the horses. What would become of them if she died here? Spotted Elk spoke then, his voice carrying across the tense silence. He addressed the outlaw in English, but spoke the words as if sharing ancient wisdom. "The man who hides behind a woman is not a man at all," he said, slowly rising to his feet despite his wounded arm. "He is a frightened child." The outlaw's grip tightened reflexively, making Sarah gasp for breath. "Shut your mouth, Redskin." "The Blackfoot do not harm children," Spotted Elk continued, taking a step forward. "But you are not a child. You are a coward who would burn a widow's barn and threaten her son." Sarah felt the outlaw's arm trembling with rage against her throat. His focus was now split between Spotted Elk approaching from the front and the Blackfoot warriors surrounding them. In that moment of divided attention, Sarah acted. Her grandmother had taught her more than just medicine. "The soft parts," the old woman had said once, demonstrating on a cornhusk doll. "Be when a man tries to harm you, go for the soft parts." Sarah drove her elbow backward with all her strength, aiming for the outlaw's midsection. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for Sarah to duck out of his grasp. She threw herself to the side as a gunshot exploded behind her. Rolling in the snow, she looked up to see the bearded outlaw staggering backward, an arrow protruding from his chest. Yellow Wolf lowered his bow, face impassive. The last outlaw, the one with the wounded shoulder, dropped his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. Running Bear said something in Blackfoot, and two warriors moved forward to secure him. Sarah struggled to her feet, her legs shaking so badly she thought they might give way. Spotted Elk was there suddenly, his good arm steadying her. "You are hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "No," she managed, though her throat ached where the outlaw's arm had pressed against it. "The children, they are safe," he assured her. "Warriors are bringing them now." Sure enough, two Blackfoot men emerged from the trees, each carrying a twin. Emma and James walked between them, wide-eyed but unharmed. Sarah ran to her children, gathering them close, checking each beloved face as if to reassure herself they were truly uninjured. "You shouldn't have come out, James," she scolded gently, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'm sorry, Mama," he whispered, tears tracking down his cheeks. "I saw them burning the barn, and I thought of Daisy and Star." "I know, sweetheart," she hugged him tighter. "But you must always follow my instructions in dangerous situations." Running Bear approached, his rifle now slung across his back. "The fire spreads," he said, nodding toward the barn, which was now fully engulfed. "My men will try to save what can be saved." As if on cue, several warriors began scooping snow onto the edges of the fire, working to prevent it from reaching the cabin. Others had entered the burning barn, and moments later emerged leading Daisy, her coat singed but otherwise unharmed. Star, the older gelding, followed, snorting in fear and confusion. "On my horses," Sarah breathed, relief washing over her. "The chickens could not be saved," Running Bear said solemnly. "But buildings can be rebuilt, animals replaced, lives cannot." Sarah nodded, still clutching her children close. "How did you know to come?" Running Bear glanced at Spotted Elk, who was allowing one of the warriors to bind his wounded arm. "After you left, Spotted Elk's young cousin arrived at our camp. He had been hunting in these hills and saw men watching your cabin from a distance. He brought word, and we rode immediately." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how I can ever repay such a debt." Running Bear studied her thoughtfully. "There is no debt between friends who help each other. This is what my grandfather taught." He turned away to speak with his men, leaving Sarah to absorb his words. Friends, not allies of convenience, not reluctant neighbors, but friends. The outlaws were bound and placed on their own horses. Running Bear explained that they would be taken to the army fort and handed over for justice. The wounded man might not survive the journey, but that was in the hands of the spirits now. As the adrenaline of danger faded, exhaustion overtook Sarah. The past 2 days had contained enough fear, wonder, and violence to fill a lifetime. She sank onto the porch steps, watching numbly as the Blackfoot warriors continued to battle the barn fire. Spotted Elk settled beside her, his arm now wrapped in a clean bandage. "Your home still stands," he said quietly. "This is good." Sarah nodded, too tired for words. After a moment, she found his hand and squeezed it briefly in silent thanks. As the winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of gold and rose, Sarah looked at the unlikely gathering around her homestead. Blackfoot warriors working alongside her children to salvage what they could from the outbuildings. Running Bear deep in conversation with Yellow Wolf, both men casting occasional glances her way. And beside her, Spotted Elk, solid and steadfast as the mountains themselves. She had lost a barn and some chickens, but she had gained something far more valuable: protection, respect, and a place in a community she would never have imagined welcoming her. As if reading her thoughts, Spotted Elk spoke. "Winter is still long, snow still deep." He hesitated, then added, "You should not stay here alone, not now that outlaws know of women and children living without man." Sarah sighed, knowing he was right. The attack today might not be the last, but what choice did she have? She couldn't abandon the homestead Thomas had worked so hard to establish, the land that represented their children's future. Running Bear approached, having overheard Spotted Elk's words. He studied Sarah's face, noting her exhaustion and worry. "I have made a decision," he announced. "The Spotted Elk will remain here until spring thaw." Sarah stared at Running Bear, then at Spotted Elk, whose expression remained unreadable. "Stay here. But surely your people need you." "My people need peace," Running Bear interrupted. "Peace means safety for all who live on these lands." He gestured toward the smoldering remains of the barn. "This violence will not be the last unless there is, what do you call it?" "Deterrent," Spotted Elk nodded slowly. "I will build new barn, stronger than before, and watch over family until warm season comes." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Pride warred with practicality in her mind. She had managed alone since Thomas's death, determined to prove, perhaps mostly to herself, that she could survive without a man's protection. But today had shown the limits of that independence. Her children might have died because of her stubborn self-reliance. "If you're certain," she said finally, "we would be grateful for your help." Running Bear seemed satisfied with this answer. "It is decided. We will camp nearby tonight to ensure no more outlaws come. Tomorrow, some warriors will return to help begin rebuilding." He glanced at the darkening sky. Winter days are short. "We should prepare for night." The Blackfoot were efficient in establishing camp. Within an hour, 3 small lodges had been erected a short distance from the cabin. A fire burned cheerfully in the yard, around which warriors sat cleaning weapons and talking in low voices. The captive outlaw was secured in one of the lodges under guard. Inside the cabin, Sarah prepared a simple meal from what provisions remained after the looters' raid. The children, exhausted by the day's events, ate quietly before succumbing to sleep on their pallets near the hearth. Sarah stepped onto the porch, wrapping her shawl tightly against the evening chill. Spotted Elk sat on the steps, carving a piece of wood with his good arm. He moved over slightly, making room for her to sit. "Thank you," she said after a comfortable silence, "for saving us today." "For agreeing to stay." He nodded, his knife continuing its steady work on the wood. "Your family saved me too." Sarah looked at him questioningly. "After my wife and son died," he explained, "I became empty, like lodge with no fire." His hand stilled, I hunted. I fought when needed. I lived, but was not alive. He turned to meet her gaze directly. Finding you in snow, seeing you fight to protect children, it woke something inside me. Something I thought was dead. The simplicity of his confession touched Sarah deeply. I understand, she said softly. After Thomas died, I felt the same emptiness. The children were the only reason I kept going. Children are future, Spotted Elk agreed, but adults need more than just future to live for, need present too. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and increasingly natural. Each morning, Spotted Elk would rise before dawn, check the perimeter of the homestead, then join Sarah and the children for breakfast. The Blackfoot warriors who had stayed to help would arrive as the sun cleared the horizon, bringing game they had hunted or supplies from their winter camp. Together, they cleared the charred remains of the barn and began constructing a new one, sturdier, as Spotted Elk had promised, with clever defensive features incorporated into the design. Sarah worked alongside them, learning to notch logs and apply chinking while the children sorted nails and carried tools. In the evenings, after the warriors had returned to their temporary camp and the children were asleep, Sarah and Spotted Elk would sit by the fire, talking in low voices. She told him about her life in Tennessee, about meeting Thomas at a church social and their journey west to claim a homestead. He shared stories of his youth, hunting buffalo across the plains before the white men came in large numbers, and of the wife who had filled his lodge with laughter before the winter took her. Gradually, as January gave way to February and then to March, something shifted between them. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it lived in the way his hand would linger when passing her a tool, in the way she found herself watching him when he didn't notice, in the quiet moments when words weren't necessary. The children accepted his presence with remarkable ease. James followed Spotted Elk everywhere, learning to set snares for rabbits and identify animal tracks in the snow. Emma was more reserved at first, but his quiet respect for her mother eventually won her over. The twins simply adored him, especially after he carved tiny horses for them from scraps of wood. As the first hints of spring softened the Montana landscape, the snow began to retreat, revealing patches of earth that had lain dormant through the long winter. New grass pushed up tentatively, and buds appeared on the trees. The promise Sarah had made to return to the Blackfoot camp when the snow melted weighed on her mind. One evening, as they sat on the newly built porch of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of amber and gold, Sarah broached the subject. "The snow is nearly gone," she said quietly. "Soon it will be time for me to visit Many Knives, as I promised." Spotted Elk nodded, his eyes on the distant horizon. "And the old one asks about you often when warriors visit camp. She is eager to share more medicine knowledge." "And you?" Sarah asked, her heart beating a little faster. "Will you return to your people when spring is fully here?" He turned to look at her then, his dark eyes holding hers. "What do you wish me to do?" The question hung between them, filled with unspoken meaning. Sarah took a deep breath. "I wish you would stay." A small smile softened his weathered features. "Then I will stay." From the doorway came a soft sound. They turned to find Emma watching them, her young face solemn but accepting. "Are you going to be our new father?" she asked Spotted Elk directly. He glanced at Sarah, then back to the girl. "If your mother wishes it, if you and your brother and sisters welcome me." Emma considered this, then nodded decisively. "James already calls you father when you're not listening, and the twins would be sad if you left." She stepped forward, her chin raised. "I miss my real father, but he would want someone to take care of us." Someone brave who makes Mama smile again. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes as Spotted Elk extended his hand to Emma, who took it without hesitation. When the day came to visit the Blackfoot camp, they traveled together, Sarah, Spotted Elk, and all 4 children. The journey was easier without snow, and the reception they received was warm. Many knives embraced Sarah like a long-lost daughter. Dancing Fawn proudly showed off her growing son. Even Yellow Wolf offered a respectful greeting. That evening, as a spring moon rose over the camp, Running Bear performed a ceremony binding Sarah and Spotted Elk as husband and wife, according to Blackfoot tradition. They would repeat the vows before a minister when one next passed through the territory, but in their hearts, this simpler ceremony held the deeper meaning. 2 peoples, 2 traditions, 2 ways of life, woven together like the strands of a strong rope. Not erasing their differences, but finding strength in them. As Sarah looked around at the faces of her children, of her new husband, of the tribe that had become a second family, she understood that they were building something precious and rare on the Montana frontier, not just survival, but a new way of living together.